Champagne flutes clinked as Victoria stood under the Ritz-Carlton spotlight. She wore a $5,000 gown, bought with my credit card. Unaware I had frozen the account 15 minutes ago, she beamed down at me with practiced affection, claiming she always believed in my tiny business. I gripped my phone, recording her lies. She thought she had secured a fortune, but as I stood up, I was signaling the federal agents waiting by the exit to arrest her. My name is Athena Blackwood, and if you had asked me 10 years ago where I would be tonight, standing in the center of the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in New York City would not have made the list. The air in the room was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, stale ambition, and the specific, metallic tang of deceit. I stood near a pillar wrapped in white silk, swirling a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking, watching the sharks circle. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. It was the official launch of the Verdant Skin flagship line, my biotech company's answer to the environmental crisis of the fashion industry. We had successfully created a lab-grown leather alternative derived from mycelium that was indistinguishable from calfskin. It was a triumph of science, grit, and 3 years of sleepless nights. But to the two people currently making their entrance through the double mahogany doors, this was not a scientific breakthrough. It was a harvest. My mother, Victoria, glided into the room as if she were the Queen of England visiting a colony. She was wearing a floor-length gown of shimmering emerald silk, a garment that cost $5,000. I knew exactly how much it cost because the alert had popped up on my phone 3 hours ago, just before I quietly logged into the banking app and froze the card she had used. She did not know that yet. Beside her was Gary, my stepfather, a man whose smile always looked like it was hurting his face. He was wearing a tuxedo that was a size too tight around the midsection, trying desperately to look like a titan of industry rather than a man who had bankrupted 3 landscape gardening businesses in the last decade. They walked with the unearned confidence of parasites who had finally found a host big enough to sustain them for life. I watched as the crowd parted for them. It was nauseating. Victoria had mastered the art of social mimicry. She spotted the CEO of a major European fashion house, a man I had spent 6 months courting to secure a distribution deal, and she beelined for him. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows of the oversized floral arrangements, needing to hear what narrative she was spinning tonight. "Oh, Pierre, it is so wonderful to finally meet the people helping my daughter bring our vision to life," Victoria cooed, placing a manicured hand on the man's arm. Her voice was a perfect octave of maternal warmth, a sound I had never heard inside our home. Pierre smiled politely. "Your daughter is a brilliant scientist, madame." "She gets it from my side of the family," Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound that grated against my nerves like sandpaper. "You know, when Athena was struggling in that little garage of hers, I told her, 'Darling, look at the mushrooms in the garden. Nature provides.' I like to think that little nudge gave her the spark she needed. We have always been a team. Really, Verdant Skin is a family passion." My grip tightened on the glass until my knuckles turned white. A family passion. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 3 years ago, Seattle. It was raining, the kind of relentless gray drizzle that seeps into your bones. I was living in a rental unit that smelled of damp carpet and despair. I had invited them over to show them my first viable prototype. It was a small patch of material, rough and uneven, but it was strong. I was proud. I was starving, behind on rent, and terrified, but I was proud. Victoria had walked into my makeshift lab, wrinkling her nose as if she had stepped into a sewer. She had picked up the prototype with 2 fingers, holding it away from her body. "What is this?" she had asked. "It is the future, Mom," I had said. "It is bio-leather." She had dropped it back onto the dirty table. "It looks like moldy trash." "Athena, my God, look at you. You look like a hobo. When are you going to get a real job? I cannot tell my friends at the club that my daughter is growing fungus in a garage. It is humiliating for me." Humiliating for her, that was the only metric that ever mattered. Back in the ballroom, Gary was working the room with a different strategy. I tracked him as he cornered our chief financial officer, a sharp woman named Linda who had zero tolerance for fools. Gary was leaning in too close, swirling a glass of scotch that was definitely top shelf. "So, Linda," Gary said, his voice booming slightly too loud for the polite hum of the room. "The valuation numbers look fantastic, really strong, but between you and me, how liquid are we talking? If the family needed to make some strategic withdrawals for, say, real estate investments to diversify the portfolio, how quickly can we move capital?" Linda took a subtle step back. "Mr. Blackwood, all capital allocation is strictly governed by the board and our Series A covenants. We are currently reinvesting 90% of revenue back into R&D. Gary's smile faltered for a second, his eyes narrowing. Right, R&D, of course. But surely there is a discretionary fund for the founders. I mean, we need to maintain an image, right? Look at this party. Perception is reality. Linda, I am afraid I need to speak with a donor. Excuse me," Linda said, slipping away with the grace of a professional dodging a bullet. Gary watched her go, a sneer replacing the smile. He looked around, his eyes scanning not the people, but the objects, the chandeliers, the silver trays. He was calculating what he could take. He was a man who saw the world as a series of unlocked doors, and he had spent the last 6 months trying to pick the lock of my life. I felt a vibration in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled out my phone. It was a message from Marcus, my personal attorney, and the only man in this room who knew the full extent of the evening's agenda. The message was short. "The trap is set. All documents are ready. Surveillance is live." I took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner suddenly. For months, I had played the role of the dutiful, overwhelmed daughter. I had let them invade my office. I had let them berate my staff. I had let them believe that I was weak, that the pressure of running a multi-million-dollar company was cracking my psyche, and that I needed them to step in and save me. I had fed their greed, spoon-feeding them the illusion of control until they were so fat and happy they did not notice the cage walls rising around them. I needed a moment before the final act. I slipped out of the ballroom and down the marble corridor toward the ladies' powder room. The silence of the heavy door closing behind me was a relief. I moved to the sink, splashing cold water on my wrists. I looked at myself in the mirror. 32 years old, dark circles under my eyes that I had stopped trying to hide. They thought the exhaustion was from stress. They did not know it was from the sheer effort of not screaming in their faces every single day. One of the stall doors opened, and 2 women walked out. I froze, stepping quickly into the adjacent alcove where the towels were stacked. Hidden from view, it was Victoria, and she was on the phone. "Oh, stop it. Carol," Victoria said, her voice echoing off the tile. She was fixing her lipstick in the mirror, oblivious to my presence. "Yes, it is stunning, but this is just the beginning. The little brat is practically catatonic. She signed the preliminary papers yesterday without even reading them. Gary says we will have full power of attorney by the end of the week." There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. "No, we are not keeping the company." Victoria scoffed. "God, no, too much work. We have a buyer lined up. Some competitor called Synthocorp. They are offering $5 million just for the formula and the patent rights. We take the cash, dump the shell company, and retire. I am already looking at that penthouse on Park Avenue, the one with the terrace. Finally, I will have the view I deserve." She laughed again. "Athena? Oh, who cares? She can go back to her little experiments. Maybe she can teach chemistry at a community college. She was never cut out for this life anyway. She does not have the stomach for business. She is soft, just like her father." My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, heavy rhythm. She is soft. I waited until she left, the click-clack of her heels fading down the hallway. I stepped out of the alcove and looked at my reflection again. She was right about one thing. The old Athena, the one who sought their approval, the one who cried when they missed her graduation, the one who starved herself to pay their debts. She was soft. But that Athena died the day they tried to sell my laptop for gambling money while I was sleeping in a car. The woman standing in the mirror was forged in fire. I walked back into the ballroom. The light seemed brighter now. The noise was louder. The moment I stepped onto the carpet, Victoria spotted me. She waved me over, her face arranging itself into a mask of beaming maternal pride. She was standing on the low stage at the front of the room, near the microphone stand. "Athena! Come up here! Darling!" she called out. The room went quiet. 300 pairs of eyes turned to me. I walked toward her. My legs felt steady. My mind was crystal clear. Gary was standing just off to the side, nodding encouragingly. He tapped his wrist, a silent signal that we needed to get on with the announcement they thought I was going to make. They believed I was going to announce a sabbatical and appoint Victoria as the interim CEO, a move that would allow them to execute the sale to Synthocorp behind my back. I climbed the steps. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot. Victoria wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. She smelled of champagne and malice. "Everyone," Victoria said into the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion. "I just want to say a few words before my daughter makes her announcement. Raising a genius is not easy." A polite ripple of laughter went through the crowd. There were hard times. Times when we did not know if she would make it. But a mother knows. A mother always knows. She turned to look at me, her eyes shining with fake tears. She squeezed my shoulder, her fingernails digging into my skin through the fabric of my blazer. It was a warning grip. "Stick to the script." That grip said, "Do not embarrass me." "Athena," she said, loud enough for the back row to hear, "I want you to know how proud Gary and I are. We have watched you grow from a little girl with a chemistry set to this tycoon, and no matter what happens next, no matter what decisions you make for your health, we are here." She turned back to the audience, soaking in the adoration. She raised her glass. "To my daughter," she declared. The visionary. The crowd applauded. I stood there, letting the sound wash over me. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone. The recording app was running. I had everything. The conversation in the bathroom, the emails Gary had sent from the company server, the forged documents they had planted. Victoria leaned in close to me, away from the microphone, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "Smile, you ungrateful little wretch. We are doing you a favor. You are going to ruin this company anyway, at least this way. We all get paid." She pulled back and smiled at the crowd, then looked at me with that beatific, saintly expression. "Athena," she said, her voice booming through the speakers again. "Moms always know best." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the lines of cruelty around her mouth that no amount of filler could hide. I saw the hunger in her eyes. I saw a woman who would eat her own young if it meant she could buy a nicer handbag. I stepped up to the microphone. I gently removed her hand from my waist. The warmth of her touch lingered like a stain. I looked out at the sea of faces, investors, journalists, employees, friends, and then I looked at the back of the room, where the exit doors were. I gave a small nod. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows. They were not hotel security, they were federal agents. I turned back to my mother. The smile on her face was starting to falter. She sensed the shift in the air. She sensed that the prey had stopped running. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice steady, amplified across the silent hall. "You have always had a way with words." I paused, letting the tension stretch until it was almost unbearable. "I always believed in you." She lied. Then, to understand why I felt zero remorse as the handcuffs clicked around my mother's wrists at the Ritz-Carlton. "You have to leave the champagne and the chandeliers behind. You have to travel back 4 years, away from New York City, to the damp, gray outskirts of Seattle. Specifically, to a basement apartment in Tacoma that smelled perpetually of mildew and boiled cabbage, where the sunlight only visited for 20 minutes a day between the hours of 2 and 3 in the afternoon. I was 28 years old, a doctoral dropout who had walked away from a prestigious university program because they refused to see the vision I had. I was trading a stipend and stability for a dream that, at the time, looked a lot like slime. My apartment was not a home. It was a laboratory that happened to have a mattress in the corner. The kitchen counters were not for cooking food. They were covered in repurposed slow cookers and glass jars filled with agricultural waste, sawdust, corn husks, and coffee grounds. This was the substrate. This was where I was trying to coax mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms, into growing into a dense, durable mat that could be tanned like leather. Every day was a war against contamination. One stray spore of mold, one temperature fluctuation, and weeks of work would dissolve into a black, putrid slush. I remember the Tuesday that Victoria and Gary came to visit. It had been raining for 9 days straight, a relentless, soaking drizzle that made the walls of the basement sweat. I had not showered in 48 hours because I was in the middle of a critical harvest cycle. I was wearing oversized sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, my hair tied back in a messy bun that was more knot than style. When I opened the door, the contrast was physical. Victoria stood there in a beige trench coat that was immaculately pressed, holding a designer umbrella that probably cost more than my car. Gary was behind her, twitching slightly, his eyes darting around the hallway as if he expected a debt collector to jump out from behind a potted plant. "Oh, Athena," Victoria sighed. Stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, she did not hug me. She wrinkled her nose, pulling a lavender-scented handkerchief from her pocket and dabbing it under her nostrils. "It smells like decomposition in here. Is this safe? Are we breathing in spores?" "It is sterile, Mom," I said, closing the door against the rain. "It is a controlled environment. Would you like some tea?" "We are not staying long," Gary said, pushing past me. He walked straight into the living area, or what used to be the living area. Now it was filled with drying racks, where failed experiments hung like sheets of beef jerky. They were not there to see me. I knew that within 30 seconds. They were there because they needed something. Gary had diversified again. That was his word for gambling away their liquid assets on high-risk stock options. He had bet heavily against a tech company that had just announced a record-breaking quarter, and the margin call was coming. They needed cash, and they had exhausted their credit lines. They had come to the daughter they ignored, hoping I had some secret stash of student loan money or grant funds left over. "We are in a bit of a liquidity pinch," Gary said, picking up one of my logbooks and tossing it back down without looking at it. "Just a short-term cash flow issue. Your mother thought maybe you could help out. Just $5,000. We would pay you back with interest next month." I almost laughed. I had $74 in my bank account. I was eating ramen noodles and stealing napkins from the deli down the street to save on paper products. "I do not have any money, Gary," I said, leaning against the counter, trying to block their view of the heating lamps I had bought at a thrift store. "I put everything into the research." Victoria turned on me, her eyes cold and sharp. "Research? Is that what you call this?" She gestured vaguely at the jars of bubbling culture. "Athena, look at you. You are living like a rat. I told my friends you were consulting for a biotech firm. I lied for you, because the truth is too embarrassing." "It is not embarrassing," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I am close to a breakthrough. I just need a little more time. Actually, since you are here, I wanted to ask if you could help me. Not $5,000, just $2,000. I need to file a provisional patent. If I do not file it, I cannot show this to investors without risking theft." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Victoria looked at Gary, and then she looked back at me. She started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound that conveyed pure disbelief. "You want us to invest in this?" she asked, walking over to the drying rack. She reached out and pinched a piece of the material. It was from an early batch. Brittle and uneven, she pulled it, and it tore with a soft, ripping sound. "Oops," she said, dropping the pieces on the floor. She did not apologize. "It is trash," Athena, it is moldy trash. This is your tiny business? This is what you left a doctorate program for? To play house with fungus? It is stronger than that, I protested, stepping forward to pick up the pieces. That was a test sample. The new formula is— Stop it, Victoria snapped. Just stop. You are delusional. You have always been like this. Head in the clouds. You think you are going to save the world with mushrooms? You cannot even pay your rent. Look at this place. It is squalid, Gary chimed in, his voice wheedling. Athena, be realistic. If you had money for a patent, you would just be throwing it away. You should come back home, get a job as a receptionist or something. We could charge you a modest rent. It would be better than this. I am not coming home to be your servant, I said, the anger finally sparking in my chest. And I am not giving up. This is going to work. Victoria shook her head, adjusting her coat. Well, if you do not have the money for us, we are wasting our time. I have a dinner reservation at 6. Come on, Gary. She turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, looking back at me one last time. I do hope you wake up soon. Darling, it is painful to watch you fail so slowly. It reflects poorly on me. Gary lingered for a second. You are sure you do not have any cash lying around? Even a few hundred? Get out, I whispered. He shrugged and followed her out. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, listening to the rain hiss against the pavement outside. I looked at the torn piece of material on the floor. My mother's words echoed in the empty room. Moldy trash. I went back to work. I worked until 3 a.m, fueled by a mixture of rage and adrenaline. I mixed a new substrate, adjusting the pH balance by 0.2%, trying to fix the brittleness issue. It was not until the next morning that I realized the laptop was gone. It was an old Dell, heavy and slow, with a cracked hinge. It was sitting on the small table by the door where I kept my keys. I had been so focused on the argument, so focused on holding back my tears, that I had not seen Gary slip it under his jacket as he left. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my veins, my data, my logs, my early formulas. I called them, straight to voicemail. I drove to their house, 40 minutes away, pounding on the door, no answer. I knew they were there. Their cars were in the driveway. They were ignoring me. 2 days later, I received a text from Gary. Found an old computer at your place. Figured you were not using it since it is practically an antique. Sold it for parts to a guy. Got $50. Buying lottery tickets. Wish us luck. $50. He had sold 3 years of my work for $50 and a chance at a scratch-off jackpot. I fell to my knees in that damp basement and screamed until my throat was raw. Thankfully, I was paranoid. I had backups on an external hard drive hidden in a box of cereal. But the betrayal was not about the data. It was about the value they placed on me. To them, my property, my work, my life was just something to be scavenged. The downward spiral accelerated after that. I had spent my last dollars on chemicals, gambling that I could get the patent and an investor before rent was due. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice was taped to the door. Mr. Henderson, my landlord, was not a cruel man, but he was a businessman. I cannot run a charity, Athena, he had said, looking at the stains on the carpet from a spilled beaker. You have to go. I packed my life into my car. It was a 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and an engine that made a rattling sound when it idled. Clothes went in the trunk. Books went in the back seat. But the passenger seat, the seat of honor, was reserved for the cooler. Inside that cooler were my cultures, the master strains, the genetic code of verdant skin. I had rigged a power inverter to the cigarette lighter to keep a small heating pad running inside the cooler, maintaining the temperature at exactly 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The first night in the car was the hardest. I parked in the back of a Walmart parking lot, under a flickering street lamp. It was November in Seattle. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees. I could not run the engine all night to use the heater because I could not afford the gas. I wrapped myself in 3 blankets and a sleeping bag. Shivering until my teeth chattered, I stared at the cooler illuminated by the dashboard lights. The green LED of the temperature gauge was the only steady thing in my world. My mother was sleeping in a heated house, probably under a goose-down duvet. Gary was probably drinking scotch. They had not called to see if I was okay. They knew I was broke. They likely assumed I had crawled back to a friend's couch or found a shelter. They did not care. As long as I did not show up at their doorstep looking poor and ruining their aesthetic. I checked the cooler again. 75 degrees. The fungus was alive. It was growing. It was eating the waste I gave it and turning it into something new. You and me, I whispered to the cooler, my breath fogging in the cold air. Just you and me. A police cruiser rolled by slowly at 2 a.m, shining a spotlight into my car. I ducked down, heart hammering, terrified they would make me move. Being homeless is illegal in all the ways that matter. You are a nuisance, a visual blight. The cruiser moved on. I lived in that car for 4 months. I developed a routine. I washed up in the bathrooms of public libraries. I used the free Wi-Fi at coffee shops, buying the cheapest tea on the menu and nursing it for 6 hours while I emailed every venture capital firm and angel investor on the West Coast. I was rejected 112 times. Bioleather is too niche. The margins are not there. You do not have a co-founder. Come back when you have revenue. But the worst days were not the rejections. The worst days were when I had to choose between gas for the car to charge the cooler or food for myself. I always chose the gas. I lost 15 pounds. My skin turned sallow. I looked like exactly what my mother said I was, a failure. But inside the cooler, the samples were thriving. I had refined the formula. I was using a new strain I had isolated from a sample I found in a rotting log in Olympic National Park. It was aggressive. It grew fast. And the matrix it created was dense, flexible, and waterproof. One afternoon, sitting in the parking lot of a Safeway, eating a can of cold beans, I saw a woman walking to her car. She was wearing a leather jacket. It was beautiful, sleek, black, structured. She opened the trunk of her Mercedes and loaded her groceries. I looked at her jacket, and then I looked at my cooler. That jacket required the skin of an animal. It required toxic tanning chemicals, chromium, formaldehyde, that poisoned rivers and workers. It was heavy. It was the past. I looked at my cooler. Inside was the future, a jacket that grew in a week, with zero toxicity, feeding on trash. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Victoria. Gary says he saw your car parked near the highway. Please tell me you are not living in that thing. It looks like a junk heap. If you're going to be homeless, at least go to a different city so people do not ask me about it. I read the text twice. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the sound of a heavy door locking shut. For years, I had held on to a tiny, pathetic hope that if I just succeeded, if I just proved myself, they would love me. I thought that if I became the person they wanted, the criticism would stop. But reading that text, sitting in the cold with a can of beans, I realized the truth. They did not hate me because I was failing. They hated me because I was inconvenient, and if I succeeded, they would not love me. They would just consume me. I blocked her number for the first time that day. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were hollow, my lips chapped, but the fear was gone. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was alone, truly alone, and that was my greatest weapon. If I could survive the freezing nights, the hunger, and the humiliation of washing my hair in a library sink, I could survive anything. I did not need their money. I did not need their approval. I needed to win. I put the car in gear. I had a meeting the next morning with an eccentric angel investor who had agreed to see me at a science fair in Bellevue. I had $3 in my bank account, enough for half a gallon of gas, just enough to get there. I patted the cooler on the passenger seat. "Let us go to work," I said. That was the moment Athena the daughter died, and Athena the CEO was born. I vowed then, as I merged onto the highway with my rattling engine, that I would build an empire, and I would build walls around it so high and so thick that Victoria and Gary would never, ever be able to touch me again. I just did not know then that they were excellent climbers. The Bellevue Innovation Expo was not the kind of place where fortunes were typically made. It was held in a community college gymnasium that smelled faintly of floor wax and teenage anxiety, populated mostly by high school robotics teams and hobbyists showing off 3D printed figurines. I was there because the entry fee was $50, which was exactly what I could afford after skipping meals for 3 days. I stood at table 42, a folding card table draped in a black sheet I had bought at a thrift store. My display was minimal: a single halogen lamp, powered by a portable battery block, illuminated 3 swatches of my material. Next to them sat my laptop, running a looping video of the growth process. Most people walked past without looking. I was the crazy lady with the mushroom leather. But then, a man in a gray hoodie stopped. He did not look like money. He looked like a retired geography teacher. He picked up the swatch, the one I had treated with a new vegetable-based tanning solution. He rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. He folded it. He scratched it with his fingernail. "Tensile strength?" he asked, without looking up. 20 megapascals, I answered instantly. Comparable to bovine leather, but 40% lighter and completely biodegradable. He looked at me then. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and devoid of the pity I had grown used to seeing. "And the production cycle?" 9 days, I said. "From spore to finished hide, cows take 3 years. He nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy stock, minimalist, Silas Vane, angel investor. "I do not care about the fashion," Silas said. "I care about the scalability. If you can grow this in a vat, you can disrupt a $100 billion industry. I will write you a seed check for $100,000 today for 10% equity. If you hit your milestones, I will lead your Series A round." I stared at him. The gymnasium noise faded into a dull hum. $100,000. It was not a fortune to him, but to me, it was oxygen. It was the difference between sleeping in a Honda Civic and renting a lab. "Deal," I said. My voice did not shake. That handshake birthed verdant skin. The next 2 years were a blur of controlled chaos. I moved out of my car and into a defunct brewery in the industrial district of Seattle. It was drafty, cold, and perfect. We turned the old fermentation tanks into bioreactors. I hired 2 graduate students from the university who were as hungry as I was. And we went to work. This was not the glamorous startup life you see in movies. There were no ping-pong tables or free kombucha on tap. This was war. I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I slept on a cot in the corner of the office, waking up to the hum of the ventilation system. I ate protein bars and drank instant coffee because chewing real food took too much time. My phone became a tool for business only. I changed my number. I did not give the new one to Victoria or Gary. I did not update my LinkedIn. I did not post on Facebook. As far as the world was concerned, Athena Blackwood had fallen off the face of the earth. The isolation was a drug, without my mother's voice in my ear telling me I was worthless. Without Gary's prying eyes looking for loose change, my mind sharpened. I became obsessed with the product. We iterated relentlessly. Batch 42 was too brittle. Batch 55 smelled like yeast. Batch 71 was perfect. We called it Myco Lux. It was soft, buttery, and had a grain pattern that was mathematically unique to each piece. It took dyes beautifully. It was waterproof. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Silas had pulled some strings and got us a pitch meeting with the head of sustainability for Aurelia, a French luxury conglomerate that owned half the high-end fashion brands in the world. They flew into Seattle on a private jet. The meeting was held in our conference room, which was just a glass box inside the warehouse. The Aurelia executives were dressed in suits that cost more than my entire first year's budget. They looked at our facility, at the bubbling tanks, at the frantic energy of my small team. I did not pitch them with a PowerPoint. I simply slid a handbag across the table. We had made it the night before, stitching it by hand. It was a deep, rich burgundy, the lead executive. A woman named Madame Dubois picked it up. She smelled it. She ran her hand over the grain. She opened the clasp. She looked at me. "This is mushroom?" she asked, her French accent thick. "It is the future," I corrected her. They signed the contract 3 days later. It was an exclusive partnership for 2 years. They would use our material for a new eco-conscious line of accessories. The upfront payment was $2 million. When the notification hit my business account, I was sitting alone in my office, eating a cup of yogurt. I looked at the number on the screen. $2 million. I did not scream. I did not pop champagne. I felt a profound, heavy silence settle over me. It was the silence of safety. For the first time in 4 years. The wolf was not at the door. I had built a fortress, and the mortar was made of money. I made my first personal purchases the following week. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a designer wardrobe to flaunt at the country club. I bought security. I purchased a condo in a high-rise in downtown Seattle. It was on the 25th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. It had a 24-hour doorman, keycard access for the elevator, and walls thick enough to block out the world. I paid cash. Then I traded in my rattling Honda Civic. I bought a Volvo SUV. It was black, understated, and built like a tank. It was the kind of car that blended into traffic, the kind of car that did not scream, "Look at me," but rather whispered, "You cannot hurt me." I kept my life completely offline. My personal Instagram account remained deactivated. I did not check in at locations. I did not accept friend requests. I was a ghost with a bank account. But secrets in a city like Seattle are like water. They eventually find a crack to leak through. The leak was my cousin, Sarah. I ran into her at a high-end grocery store while I was buying organic produce. I was wearing a cashmere sweater and looking healthy. My skin clear. My hair professionally cut. I saw the recognition in her eyes, followed immediately by the calculation. She saw the expensive groceries in my cart. She saw the car key fob in my hand. "Athena?" she gasped. "Oh my God, we thought you were dead. Or in rehab. You look expensive." "Hello, Sarah," I said coolly. "I am in a rush." I left before she could ask questions, but I knew the damage was done. Sarah was the family broadcaster. She would call Victoria before I even started my car. The reaction was predictable and swift. 3 days later, the emails started. I had blocked their numbers, but I had kept an old email address active specifically to monitor them, like a scientist monitoring a virus in a petri dish. The first email from Victoria arrived at 2 a.m. The subject line was, "Thinking of my baby girl. Dearest Athena, Sarah told me she saw you downtown. She said you looked wonderful. I cannot tell you what a relief that is. Gary and I have been so worried sick about you. We have been praying every night. I know we had our differences in the past, and maybe I was a little hard on you. But you have to understand. It was only because I wanted the best for you. Tough love is the hardest kind of love to give. We should catch up. I miss my daughter. Gary misses you too. We are family, after all. And family sticks together. Let us grab lunch? My treat. Love, Mom." I read the email while standing in my kitchen, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the dark water. The manipulation was so clumsy it was almost insulting. Tough love. Worried sick. She did not mention the laptop Gary stole. She did not mention the names she called me. She did not mention leaving me to sleep in a freezing car. She smelled money. Sarah must have described the cashmere in the car with vivid detail. The scent of success had drifted back to the suburbs, and the parasites were hungry. I did not reply. I moved the email to a folder I had named Evidence. 2 days later, another email came. This one was more desperate. "Athena, are you getting these? I hope you are not holding a grudge. Life is too short for anger. Gary has been looking at some investment opportunities that I think you would be interested in. Since you are doing so well now, maybe we could partner up? It would be a great way to rebuild our bond." Partner up. The audacity was breathtaking. I sat there in the silence of my $2 million apartment, drinking tea from a ceramic cup that cost $50, and I felt nothing but a cold. Hard resolve. They wanted access. They wanted to climb the ladder I had built with my own blood and sweat, but they did not realize that I had pulled the ladder up behind me. I continued to work. We were scaling up production. The deal with Aurelia was just the beginning. I hired a security firm to sweep my office for bugs. Not because I suspected corporate espionage, but because I suspected my mother. I instructed the front desk at the Verdant Skin office that if a woman named Victoria Blackwood or a man named Gary ever showed up, they were to be escorted off the property immediately. I thought I was safe. I thought silence was a shield. But I had underestimated the persistence of a narcissist who feels entitled to someone else's life. Victoria did not just want my money, she wanted the credit. She wanted to rewrite history so that my success was actually her success. And since I would not let her in through the front door, she began to look for a window. The silence from my end was driving her mad. I could feel it. The emails became more frequent, swinging wildly between aggression and victimization. You are being selfish, Athena. After all we did for you, I am your mother. I deleted them all, archiving them in the dark corners of my server. I focused on the mycelium. It was honest. It grew when you fed it. It died when you neglected it. It did not lie. It did not manipulate. I was preparing for the next phase of the company, the Series A funding round where we would open up to institutional investors. The valuation was projected to be $50 million. I was on top of the world, but in the shadows, the family was regrouping. They realized that the direct approach had failed. The guilt trip had failed. So they decided to change tactics. If they could not guilt me into giving them money, they would trick me into giving them everything. And the gateway to their new plan came in the form of a phone call I received on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It was not from Victoria. It was from a hospital administrator. "Ms. Blackwood?" the voice said, grave and professional. "We have your mother, Victoria, here in the emergency room. She has collapsed. She is asking for you." I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. It was the one weakness they knew I still had. The one biological imperative that is almost impossible to sever. The fear of death. I knew, logically, it was likely a trap. But the what if is a powerful drug. What if she was really dying? What if this was the end? I grabbed my keys. I walked out of my fortress. I drove my safe, black car toward the hospital. I did not know it then, but I was driving straight into the second act of their play. I was leaving the sanctuary of my success and stepping back into the mud. And this time, they were not just going to ask for money, they were going to try to skin me alive. The sterile scent of a hospital corridor is specifically designed to trigger anxiety. It is a cocktail of rubbing alcohol, floor wax, and the metallic tang of recirculated air that whispers of mortality. As I walked down the hallway of the 4th floor, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence against the linoleum, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. It was not fear. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of obligation. I had parked my Volvo in the garage, checking the lock 3 times. I carried my handbag, a structured leather tote from the Aurelia collection that retailed for $4,000, close to my body. It was a prototype made of my mycelium, but to the untrained eye, it looked like the finest calfskin money could buy. I was walking into the lion's den, and I was bringing fresh meat. Room 404. I paused at the door. Through the narrow glass pane, I could see them. Victoria was lying in the hospital bed, propped up by 3 pillows. She looked small. That was the first thing that struck me. The towering, terrifying figure of my childhood had shrunk. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immovable helmet of blonde ambition, was flat against her skull. She was wearing a nasal cannula, the clear plastic tubing looping over her ears. Though the monitor next to her showed her oxygen levels were perfectly normal at 99%. Gary sat in a plastic chair in the corner, flipping through a wrinkled magazine. He looked older, too, his face puffy, his cheap suit jacket straining at the seams. I took a deep breath. composed my face into a mask of professional concern, and pushed the door open. "Athena," Gary said, jumping up. His eyes did not go to my face. They went instantly to the bag on my shoulder, then down to my shoes, and finally to the diamond studs in my ears. It was a reflex for him, an involuntary appraisal of net worth. "You came." Victoria opened her eyes. She let out a ragged, theatrical breath. "Is that my daughter?" "I am here. Mom," I said, standing at the foot of the bed. I did not move to hug her. I kept the bed between us, a physical barrier. "The doctor said you collapsed. What happened?" "It is just everything," Victoria whispered, her hand fluttering to her chest. "Stress, exhaustion. My heart is just so tired. Athena, it has been so hard." She looked at me with wide, watery eyes. It was a performance worthy of Broadway. I could see the cracks in it, the way her eyes remained alert and scanning while her mouth trembled, the way she positioned her hand to show off the IV line, but seeing her there, hooked up to machines, triggered a dormant code in my brain, the biological imperative. She was the woman who gave birth to me. "We have had a rough go of it, Athena," Gary said, stepping closer. He smelled of stale tobacco and cheap mints. "The economy, the pandemic, it killed the landscaping business. Clients just stopped paying. We had to leverage the house. Then the market took a dive. We are underwater. Your mother has been skipping her heart medication to save money for groceries." He let that hang in the air. Skipping medication to buy food. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. Victoria would starve before she skipped a beauty treatment, let alone life-saving medication. But the image was curated to twist the knife in my gut. "I am sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We did not want to bother you," Victoria croaked. "I told Gary, do not call her. She has her own life. She does not care about us anymore. But I just wanted to see you one last time." "You are not dying, Mom," I said sharply. "The nurse said it was a panic attack and dehydration." "It feels like dying," she countered, closing her eyes dramatically. "The stress of the debt, the collectors calling day and night, it is killing me. Athena, literally killing me." I looked at them. They were pathetic. They were grifters running a low-level con in a hospital room. But they were also my family, and I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of the guilt. I had millions in the bank. I had just closed a deal that would secure my future for decades. The money meant nothing to me, but it meant everything to them. I made a calculation. If I gave them money, I could buy their silence. I could buy my freedom. I could pay them to stay away. "How much?" I asked. Gary blinked. "What?" "The hospital bill," I said. "And the debt. How much to make the stress go away?" Gary and Victoria exchanged a look. It was a microsecond of telepathic greed. "The medical bills are about $5,000, Gary said quickly. "And the mortgage arrears maybe another $10,000? Just to get current. $15,000. That was the price of their dignity." "Fine," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out my checkbook. "I will pay the hospital bill directly, and I will write you a check for $10,000. But this comes with conditions. You do not call me. You do not show up at my home. This is a one-time assistance package." Victoria sat up a little straighter. The oxygen tube slipped from her nose, and she did not bother to put it back. "Oh, Athena, you are a saint. I knew you still had a heart." I wrote the check. My handwriting was sharp, jagged. I tore it out and handed it to Gary. His fingers trembled as he took it. He stared at the numbers as if they were a religious text. "Thank you, Athena," Gary said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. The emotion of avarice. "You have no idea what this means." "I have to go," I said, closing my bag. "I have a board meeting in an hour." "Wait," Gary said. "How are you doing all this? I mean, look at you. The clothes, the car key. Is that a Volvo? You must have landed a hell of a job." "I run my own company," I said, the pride slipping out before I could check it. "Really?" Victoria asked, her eyes narrowing. What kind of company? Is it that mushroom thing? It is a biotechnology firm, I said. Do you have a card? Gary asked. In case of emergencies, so we do not have to call the hospital switchboard. I hesitated. This was the precipice. I should have said no. I should have walked out. But I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to show them that the tiny business they mocked was real. I wanted to rub their noses in my validity. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a business card. It was heavy. Matte black cardstock with gold foil lettering. Athena Blackwood, founder and CEO, Verdant Skin. I handed it to Gary. He held it up to the light. CEO, he read aloud. Verdant Skin. Sounds fancy. Victoria snatched the card from his hand. She stared at it. I watched her pupils dilate. She was not looking at the design. She was looking at the address, a prime location in the technology district. She was looking at the title. And then, the miracle happened. Victoria swung her legs over the side of the bed. She pulled the IV tape off her hand with a sharp rip. She stood up. The frailty vanished. Her posture straightened. The dying woman was gone, replaced by the predator I knew so well. Verdant Skin, she mused. I read about that. In Forbes, something about a sustainable textile revolution. They just signed a massive deal with a French house. She looked up at me. Her smile was slow, wide, and terrifying. My daughter, she said softly. The millionaire. I have to go, I repeated, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. I turned and walked out the door. I did not look back, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. I had not just given them money, I had given them a scent. I had confirmed that the prey was fat and slow. The invasion began 3 days later. I was in the middle of a strategy meeting with my lead chemist when the receptionist, a sweet 22-year-old named Jessica, knocked on the glass door of the conference room. She looked confused and slightly delighted. Athena, she said, I am sorry to interrupt, but your mother is here. My pen stopped moving. My what? Your mother, Jessica said. Victoria. She is in the lobby. She brought cupcakes for the whole staff. She is charming everyone. She said she just wanted to surprise you. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Excuse me, I told my team. I walked out to the lobby. It was a modern open space with polished concrete floors and living walls of moss. And there, in the center of it, was Victoria. She looked nothing like the woman in the hospital bed. She was wearing a new suit, a white pantsuit that looked suspiciously similar to one I had worn in a press release photo. Her hair was perfectly coiffed. She was holding a box of artisanal cupcakes from the most expensive bakery in the city. She was holding court. 3 of my junior developers were standing around her, laughing. Oh, Athena was always such a curious child, Victoria was saying, her hand resting casually on the shoulder of my intern. I remember when she was 5. She tried to make perfume out of rose petals in the garden. I always encouraged her creativity. I told her, Athena, the world is your laboratory. She spotted me. Her face lit up. There she is, Victoria cried, throwing her arms wide. My brilliant CEO! She rushed over and hugged me. It was a tight, possessive hug. I stood stiff as a board, my arms at my sides. What are you doing here? I hissed into her ear. She pulled back, still smiling for the audience. Just visiting my daughter at work. Is that a crime? I wanted to see where the magic happens. And Gary, she lowered her voice. Gary is parking the car. He is dying to see the warehouse. You need to leave, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Now. Don't be silly, darling, she said, loudly enough for Jessica to hear. I just want to be a part of your life. After the scare at the hospital, it made me realize how short life is. We want to help. We want to support you. She turned to Jessica. She works too hard, doesn't she? Someone needs to make sure she eats. She does work very hard, Jessica agreed, smiling. It is so nice to meet you. Mrs. Blackwood, Athena never talks about her family. Oh, she is just private. Victoria winked. But we are very close. In fact, I was thinking I could come by a few times a week, just to help organize things, answer phones, maybe help with HR. I have excellent people skills. I felt the walls closing in. It was happening. The Trojan horse had not just entered the city, it was unpacking its luggage in the lobby. In my office, I said. Now. I marched her into my office and slammed the door. I turned to face her. You are not working here. You are not visiting here. I gave you $10,000. That was the deal. Victoria walked over to my desk and ran her finger along the edge of my monitor. She looked out the window at the view of the city. $10,000, she said, her voice dripping with amusement. That was sweet. Athena, like giving a homeless person a sandwich. But we both know the situation has changed. You are not a struggling student anymore. You are a public figure, and public figures need to be careful about their image. She turned to face me. The mask was gone. The eyes were hard. Imagine if the press found out that the CEO of Verdant Skin, the darling of the eco-movement, left her sick, elderly parents to rot in poverty while she sat in this ivory tower, Victoria said. That would not look very sustainable, would it? I stared at her. It was blackmail, subtle, implied, emotional blackmail. What do you want? I asked. We want to be involved, she said. Gary wants a job, something simple, maybe in logistics. He is good with inventory, and I think I would make a wonderful chief culture officer, or at least a consultant. No, I said. Think about it. She smiled. We are going to be here, Athena. We are family. You cannot fire family. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Athena. Jessica's voice came through. There is a Gary Blackwood here? He says he is your father. He is asking for a tour of the server room. I looked at Victoria. She was examining her fingernails, looking completely at home in my sanctuary. I had made a fatal error. You are a scientist. You are brilliant with molecules and formulas. But people? People are messy. You have always struggled with social cues. Remember how you used to hide in your room when guests came over? I can help you. I want the position of Human Resources Director. I stared at her from behind my desk. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. Absolutely not, I said. You have zero experience in corporate HR. You have never held a job for longer than 6 months. And frankly, you are the last person I would trust with sensitive employee data. Sensitive? She laughed. A dismissive sound. Darling, I know secrets. That is my specialty. Who better to manage your team than your own mother? I can tell you who is loyal and who is just here for a paycheck. No, I said. The answer is no. You are not working here. It was then that Gary spoke up. He had been standing near the door, twisting a baseball cap in his hands. He looked small, defeated, and harmless. It was a pose he had perfected over 30 years of dodging creditors. Athena, he said softly. We get it. We are not qualified to run the show. Victoria just wants to be close to you. But me? I know I messed up. I sold your computer. I was desperate. I hate myself for it every day. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. I just want to make it right, he continued. I do not want to be an executive. I do not want a desk. I just want to work. Let me sweep the floors. Let me carry boxes. Put me in the warehouse. I used to run landscaping crews. I know how to organize inventory. Just give me a chance to earn my keep. Minimum wage. Please. I looked at him. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was a mistake, but the human part, the part that remembered him teaching me to ride a bike before the gambling addiction took over, felt a twinge of pity. A warehouse job was harmless. I reasoned. He would be moving crates of raw biomass. He would be nowhere near the intellectual property, the formulas, or the financial data. It was manual labor. It was a way to keep him busy and, perhaps, a way to assuage the guilt of my sudden wealth. Fine, I said, and I saw a flicker of triumph in Victoria's eyes that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Warehouse associate, level 1. You report to the floor manager. Mike, you punch a clock. You follow safety protocols. If you are late once, you are fired. And you, I pointed at Victoria, you get nothing. You are not an employee. You are a guest. And guests need to make appointments. Fair enough, Gary said, putting on his cap. Thank you. Athena, you will not regret this. I did regret it. I regretted it almost immediately, though I did not realize the extent of the damage until it was too late. Gary went to the warehouse. To his credit, he showed up on time. He wore the high-visibility vest. He drove the forklift. My floor manager, Mike, told me that Gary was a bit chatty, but a hard worker. I relaxed. I thought I had contained the threat. But while Gary was in the back moving boxes, Victoria was executing a far more subtle and dangerous campaign in the front of the house. She did not need a title to wield power. She simply leveraged the one title that no corporate flowchart could account for: the mother. She began showing up at lunch hour. She would bring food, expensive catering platters, homemade lasagna, boxes of pastries. She would set up in the break room and invite the staff to eat. My employees were young, most of them were under 30, brilliant scientists and engineers who were overworked and underfed. They saw a kind, older woman offering them free food and maternal warmth. They did not see the viper. I began to notice the change in the atmosphere about 2 weeks in. It was subtle at first. A sudden hush when I walked into a room. A strange, pitting look from my junior data analyst. A hesitation when I gave a direct order. I cornered my assistant, Jessica, in the copy room. "What is going on?" I asked. "Why is everyone acting like I have a terminal illness?" Jessica looked uncomfortable. She shifted her weight. "Well, your mom, she is just so worried about you." "Worried about what?" "She told us about the episodes," Jessica whispered. My blood ran cold. "What episodes?" "She said that you work so hard because you are running from your demons," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a murmur. "She said you had a breakdown in college, that you hear voices when you are stressed. She told us to just be gentle with you, to not upset you. She said that she is basically guiding the ship from behind the scenes because the pressure is too much for you." I stood there, stunned. It was brilliant. It was evil, but it was brilliant. She was undermining my authority not by attacking my competence, but by attacking my sanity. She was painting herself as the benevolent caretaker and me as the unstable genius who needed to be managed. "That is a lie," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I have never had a breakdown. She is manipulating you." Jessica looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw it. She did not believe me. She saw a woman denying her illness, which only confirmed the diagnosis. "Of course. Athena, whatever you say, do you want some herbal tea?" Victoria brought some. She said it helps you calm down. I walked out of the room. I wanted to fire everyone. I wanted to ban Victoria from the building. But I knew that if I made a scene, if I screamed and yelled, I would be playing exactly into the script she had written. See? There she goes, unstable. While Victoria was dismantling my reputation, Gary was dismantling my security. I thought the warehouse was safe. I was wrong. The warehouse was where the product left the building. It was where the shipping labels were printed. It was where the client list lived in physical form. Gary was not just moving boxes. He was reading them. Every time a shipment went out to Aurelia in France, or to our new partners in Milan, Gary was there. He volunteered for the late shifts when the floor manager went home. He would pull the packing slips. He would take out his phone, a new iPhone I noticed he had acquired, and he would photograph the documents. He was capturing everything: contact names, phone numbers, volume of orders, pricing tiers, the exact chemical composition listed on the hazard sheets. He was building a database. I found out later that he was also charming the logistics coordinator, a young man named Ben. Gary would take Ben out for beers after work. He would tell Ben stories about how he used to be a big-time investor, how he was just helping his daughter out, but he was really the brains behind the operations funding. Athena is great with the science, Gary told Ben over a pitcher of ale. But business? She is a deer in headlights. I am the one who really closes the deals. We just let her play CEO to keep her happy. Ben believed him. Why wouldn't he? Gary had the gray hair, the confidence of a con man, and he was the father. Biology carries a weight of authority that is hard to break. The tension in the office became suffocating. I felt like a stranger in my own company. Decisions were being second-guessed. I would give an instruction, and an employee would say, "Let me just double-check that," as if they needed to clear it with a higher power. That higher power was my mother. Sitting in the break room with a tray of cookies, I needed to get away. I needed to focus. And I had a legitimate reason to leave. Aurelia was hosting a sustainability gala in London, and they wanted me to be the keynote speaker. It was a 3-day trip. I will be gone until Thursday, I told my team. Jessica, you have the emergency numbers. Do not let anyone into my office. Have a safe trip, Jessica said. Victoria said she would bring in dinner for us while you are pulling the all-nighters in London. I ignored her and left. My flight to London was filled with anxiety. I could not shake the feeling that I was leaving the gates open, but I had to go. This relationship was the cornerstone of our revenue. The trip was a success on paper. I gave the speech. I shook hands. But my mind was back in Seattle. I returned a day early. I took a red-eye flight. Landing at 4 a.m. on a Wednesday, I was exhausted. I took an Uber straight to my apartment, craving my own bed and the silence of my sanctuary. When I got to my building, the doorman, a usually stoic man named Henry, looked surprised to see me. "Ms. Blackwood?" he said. "You are back early. The party is still going." I stopped dead in the lobby. "What party?" "The Verdant Skin Mixer," Henry said, looking confused. "Your mother. She said you organized it for the local investors. She has been up there since 7. She ordered catering. I let the guests up because, well, she had the key." The key? I had a spare key hidden in a magnetic box inside the wheel well of my Volvo. It was for emergencies. Gary must have found it. I did not take the elevator. I ran up the stairs. I burst into my apartment. The air smelled of wine and expensive cheese. There were about 20 people in my living room. I did not know half of them, but I recognized the others. They were local business owners, small-time investors, people Victoria knew from her country club days. Victoria was standing by the window, holding a glass of my vintage wine. She was wearing one of my silk robes over her clothes, acting as if she owned the place. "And here's the view I was telling you about," she was saying to a man in a cheap suit. "We bought this place with cash. Athena wanted something smaller, but I told her, 'No, darling, you need to project power.'" She turned and saw me standing in the doorway, my suitcase handle gripped in my hand, my eyes burning with fatigue and rage. The room went silent. "Athena," Victoria cried, not missing a beat. "You are back. Everyone, look who it is. The traveler returns." She rushed over to me, trying to hug me. I stepped back. "Get out," I said. My voice was a whisper, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. "Don't be rude, darling," Victoria hissed through her smile. "These are important people. Mr. Henderson here owns a dry cleaning chain. He is interested in investing." "Get out," I screamed. "Everyone, get out of my house." The guests scrambled. They put down their glasses. They grabbed their coats. Within 2 minutes, the apartment was empty, save for Victoria. She stood in the center of the living room, looking at me with disdain. "You are hysterical," she said. "I was networking for you. Do you know how much this party cost? I had to sign your name on the catering invoice because they would not take my card. You should be thanking me." "You forged my signature?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I signed on behalf of the company," she said, waving a hand. "It is a business expense. Stop being so dramatic. You have millions. A few $1,000s for cheese and wine is nothing." I walked over to the table. There was an invoice from a high-end catering company, $5,000, signed Athena Blackwood. in a handwriting that looked frighteningly similar to my own. She had practiced. "Give me my key," I said. She reached into her pocket and tossed the magnetic box onto the table. "You are so ungrateful. I am building your brand. Athena, you are a scientist. You are boring. I am the face. I am the story. People love me. Leave," I said. "If I see you here again, I will call the police." "You won't," she said, walking to the door. "Because if you do, I will tell everyone that you are off your meds again. And after tonight, after you screamed at potential investors, they will believe me." She slammed the door behind her. I stood in the wreckage of my sanctuary. Wine stains on the white carpet, crumbs on the sofa, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. I felt a cold realization settle in my gut. This was not just about mooching money anymore. This was a coup. They were not just parasites. They were a virus. And a virus does not stop until it has taken over the host completely. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I saw Victoria getting into Gary's car. He had been waiting for her. They drove off into the night. I picked up the invoice with my forged signature. I looked at it for a long time. Then, I walked to my safe, opened it, and placed the invoice inside. "Evidence," I whispered. I did not know it then. But this piece of paper was the first nail in their coffin. They thought they were taking over. They thought I was weak. But they had forgotten the first rule of working with fungus. It digests the dead. And I was done being alive for them. The valuation of Verdant Skin hit $50 million on an overcast Tuesday in October. We were preparing for our Series A funding round. A process that required a level of corporate due diligence that made my previous sleepless nights look like a vacation. I was buried under mountains of compliance paperwork, intellectual property audits, and financial projections. The sharks were circling, but this time they were venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. And they smelled blood in the water. They were not the only ones. While I was negotiating equity splits and board seats, a different kind of negotiation was happening in the shadowy corners of a dive bar in South Seattle. I did not know it at the time, but my stepfather, Gary, had been approached by a man named Julian, a corporate acquisition specialist for Synthocorp. Synthocorp was our direct competitor, a massive, soulless chemical giant that had been trying to crack the code on bioleather for 5 years and had failed miserably. They had the infrastructure, the factories, and the distribution channels, but they lacked the one thing I had, the proprietary genetic sequence of the mycelium strain that made my leather durable. Synthocorp did not want to buy my company. That would cost them $50 million and leave me in charge. They wanted to steal the company. And in Gary, they found a man whose moral compass had been pawned years ago. The deal they struck was simple and brutal. Gary and Victoria would deliver the formula and the patent transfer rights. In exchange, Synthocorp would wire $5 million into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was enough money for my mother and stepfather to disappear to a villa in Mexico, leaving me with a hollowed-out shell of a business and a reputation in ruins. To execute this heist, they needed one of two things: my biometrics to access the secure server where the formula was stored, or my signature on a power of attorney document that would allow them to legally transfer the assets on my behalf. They decided to try for both. The campaign began with a cup of tea. I was working late in my home office, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the dark room. Victoria knocked on the doorframe. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a steaming mug. "You look exhausted. Athena," she said, her voice soft and maternal. "I made you my special herbal blend, chamomile and valerian root. It will help you focus, but keep you calm. You cannot burn the candle at both ends forever." I took the mug. I was tired. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. "Thank you, Mom," I said, taking a sip. It tasted slightly bitter, masked by a heavy dose of honey. "Drink it all," she urged, standing there until I finished the last drop. Mother's orders. That tea became a nightly ritual, and with it came the fog. I started losing time. I would be reading a contract, and suddenly I would look up, and 2 hours had passed. and I could not remember a single word I had read. My limbs felt heavy, as if I were moving through water. I started making small mistakes, typos in emails, misplacing my keys, forgetting the names of employees I saw every day. Victoria was always there to catch me and to gaslight me. "Athena, you are slurring your words," she would say during dinner, looking at Gary with a worried expression. "Are you sure you are okay? You sound just like your father did before his first episode." "I am fine," I would insist, rubbing my temples. "Just tired." "You forgot to pay the power bill," she told me one morning. "The lights flickered. I had to call them and pay it from my own allowance. You really are losing your grip. Darling, maybe you should let Gary handle the household accounts, just to take the load off." I checked my bank statement later. The power bill had been paid automatically, just like always, but the doubt had been planted. Was I losing it? Was the stress finally cracking my brain? The drug she was crushing into my tea was not valerian root. It was a mild benzodiazepine mixed with an over-the-counter sedative. Just enough to make me pliable. Just enough to make me doubt my own reality. The first attempt to steal the company happened on a Thursday night. I had passed out on the sofa in my living room. The tea had been particularly strong that night. I was in a deep, dreamless gray void. I woke up to the sensation of hot breath on my face. My eyes fluttered open. The room was dark, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains. Hovering directly above me was Victoria. She was holding my iPhone. She was inching it closer and closer to my face, trying to align the infrared camera with my eyes. "Mom?" I mumbled, my tongue feeling thick and swollen. She froze. "Shh, go back to sleep, darling," she whispered. "I was just checking your alarm. I did not want you to oversleep for your big meeting." I blinked, trying to clear the haze. "What time is it?" "It is 3 a.m, she said. "Go back to sleep." I closed my eyes, dragging myself back into the darkness. But a part of my brain, the lizard brain that senses danger, remained awake. Why was she checking my alarm at 3 a.m? The next day? I checked my phone's security logs. There had been 5 failed unlock attempts between 3 and 3:30 in the morning. They had tried to use my Face ID to access the Verdant Skin admin app. They wanted to download the source code, but what Victoria did not understand about technology could fill a library, even if she unlocked the phone. The app required a secondary authentication, a 6-digit code generated by a physical token that I kept on a chain around my neck, tucked under my shirt. She had failed. The digital fortress held. So, they switched to the analog weapon. Paper. It was tax season. As a business owner, tax season is a nightmare of forms, receipts, and government bureaucracy. My desk was covered in stacks of paper, federal filings, state filings, employment tax records, capital gains projections. Gary came into my office on a Saturday afternoon. He was sweating. It was a cold day, but there were beads of perspiration on his upper lip. He was carrying a fresh stack of documents. "Athena," he said, his voice tight. "The accountant, Mr. Friedman, just sent these over by courier. He says he needs them signed today to avoid a penalty. It is just the standard quarterly filings and the representation letters." I looked at the stack. It was 2 inches thick. "Can't it wait until Monday? I need to read them." No, Gary said, rushing around the desk to stand beside me. "Today is the filing deadline for the extension. If we miss it, the IRS audits us. You do not want an audit right before the Series A, do you? That would scare off the investors." He was right. An audit would be catastrophic. "Fine," I said, reaching for my pen. My hand was shaking slightly, a side effect of the withdrawal from the sedatives. As I had skipped the tea the night before because I had run out of honey, Gary started flipping the pages for me. "Sign here, and here, initial here, date here." He was moving fast. Too fast. "What is this one?" I asked, pausing at a document that looked different. The header was dense with legibility. "Just the state tax authorization," Gary said. his finger tapping the signature line impatiently. "It lets the accountant talk to the state board about the payroll tax error from last quarter. Remember? We overpaid." I did not remember overpaying, but my head was swimming. The letters on the page were dancing. "Sign here," Gary urged. "Come on, Athena. Victoria is making dinner. Let us get this done." I signed. He flipped the page. "And here, this is for the city business license renewal." I signed. He flipped another page. "And this one, it is just a formality. Standard update for the corporate officers list." I looked at the document. The text was dense, single-spaced, general power of attorney. The words were there, buried in the middle of the paragraph, granting full authority to transfer, sell, or liquidate assets. "Gary," I said, squinting. "This says power of attorney." "For the taxes," Gary said, his voice pitching up an octave. "It is limited to tax matters. Look, see? It says assets. Right there." Referring to tax assets, Friedman explained it. "It is standard." He was lying. I could smell the fear on him. It was a sour, metallic scent. But I was so tired, and I trusted him. Not because he was trustworthy, but because I could not conceive that he would sell me out for parts. I wanted to believe that his redemption in the warehouse was real. I wanted to believe that the family was healing. "Okay," I whispered. I lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. Gary held his breath. I could hear the wheeze in his chest. I signed my name, Athena Blackwood. Gary snatched the paper away the moment the ink hit the page. He did not wait for me to date it. He gathered the stack, tapping it against the desk to align the edges. "Great," he said, letting out a long, shuddering exhale. "Great. I will run these over to Friedman's Dropbox right now. You rest. You look terrible." "Thanks, Gary," I said, closing my eyes. He practically ran out of the room. I sat there in the silence, listening to the sound of his car starting in the driveway. It was a distinct sound, the roar of the engine as he floored the accelerator, eager to get away from the crime scene. I had just signed my death warrant. That document was not going to an accountant. It was going to a lawyer hired by Synthecorp. It gave Gary and Victoria the legal right to act as my agents. With that piece of paper, they could sign a contract selling the intellectual property of Verdant Skin to Synthecorp for $5 million. They could sign a transfer order moving the patent rights. They could drain the corporate accounts. And because I had signed it willingly, with a witness, Victoria had been standing in the hallway, watching, it would be legally binding. I drifted off to sleep in my chair, the drugs in my system pulling me down into the black water. I dreamed of mushrooms. I dreamed of them consuming a dead log, breaking it down, turning the rot into life. When I woke up, it was dark. The house was silent. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. It was the kind of clarity that comes when the fever breaks. I sat up. My neck was stiff. I looked at the empty spot on the desk where the papers had been. Something was wrong. I replayed the scene in my head. Gary's sweat, the speed, the way he snatched the paper, tax assets. There is no such thing as a tax asset in that context. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen. I needed water. I needed to flush the poison out of my system. I opened the trash can to throw away a paper towel. And there, sitting on top of the coffee grounds and eggshells, was a crumpled piece of paper. I reached in and pulled it out. It was one of the tax documents Gary had forgotten to take, or perhaps had discarded because he messed up the page order. It was a draft, a practice sheet. It was a printout of an email chain between Gary and an address ending in https://www.google.com/search?Q equals synthecorp.com. Subject: Transfer Protocol, Gary. Once you have the POA signed, bring the originals to the hotel. We will have the notary ready. The wire transfer for the $5 million is set to clear as soon as the IP assignment is recorded. Do not mess this up. We need that signature. Julian. I stood in my kitchen, holding the coffee-stained paper. The gaslighting evaporated, the fog lifted, the herbal tea, the concern, the warehouse job, the hospital visit. It all clicked into place like the tumblers of a safe. They were not just stealing from me, they were selling me. They were going to take the work of my life, the technology that could save the planet, and sell it to a pollution giant for $5 million so they could drink margaritas in Mexico. I did not scream. I did not cry. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that was colder than the liquid nitrogen in my labs. It was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. I walked to the sink and washed the coffee grounds off the paper. I laid it flat on the counter to dry. Then, I went to the bathroom and stuck my finger down my throat. I purged the tea, the dinner, the drugs. I washed my face with ice-cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, but they were sharp. "Okay," I said to the reflection. "You want a war? I will give you an apocalypse." I walked back to my office. I locked the door. I pulled out my laptop, not the one Gary had access to, but a burner laptop I kept for high-security travel. I turned it on. I had work to do. They had the signature. They thought they had won, but they had forgotten that I built the system, and if they wanted to use my authority to sell the company, I was going to make sure that what they were selling was a bomb. The trap was no longer just a defensive measure. It was now an offensive weapon, and I had about 12 hours before the banks opened on Monday morning to rewrite the code of their destruction. The morning sun that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse was usually a source of comfort, a reminder that I had risen above the gloom of the basement in Tacoma. But on that Sunday morning, the light felt clinical, like an interrogation lamp. I sat at my kitchen island, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of me. I had not slept. After purging the sedatives from my system, I had spent the dark hours of the morning sitting in silence, letting the cold rage crystallize into a plan. I picked up my iPad Pro. It was sitting on the counter where I had left it the night before. The screen was black, but when I tilted it against the morning light, I saw them. Smudges, greasy, chaotic smears that marred the pristine glass. I did not touch the screen. I leaned in close. The smudges were concentrated over the passcode area. Someone had tried to guess my code, repeatedly, and then there was a larger smear near the top, where the facial recognition camera was housing. They had tried to lift the device, tried to hold it up to my sleeping face to bypass the lock. It was a clumsy, amateurish attempt at digital intrusion. It had Victoria written all over it. I unlocked the device with my own face, my expression stone cold. I navigated to the internal security app I had coded myself. A program I called the Watchtower. It monitored all network traffic on my private Wi-Fi and the secure servers at Verdant Skin. The logs told a damning story. At 3:14 in the morning, while I was supposedly unconscious from the drug tea, there had been an attempt to access the company's secure cloud drive from an IP address registered to my home router. The device used was not my laptop. It was an iPhone 15 Pro. I did not own an iPhone 15 Pro, but I had seen Gary showing one off to the warehouse guys a week ago. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. They had tried to brute force the password. When that failed, they tried to use the forgot password protocol, which sent a reset link to my email. But since my email was protected by a hardware security key, the YubiKey I wore on a chain around my neck, they could not open the link. They were locked out of the digital vault. That explained the desperation with the power of attorney paperwork yesterday. Since they could not steal the data directly, they needed the legal authority to sell the rights to it. I put the iPad down. My hands were steady. The trembling from the withdrawal was gone, replaced by a hyper-awareness that felt like I had engaged a combat mode. I needed more proof. I needed the smoking gun that would not just fire them, but bury them. I dressed in my usual armor, a sharp navy blazer, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked with authority. I drove to the office. It was Sunday, so the building was empty. The silence in the warehouse was heavy, broken only by the hum of the HVAC system and the faint bubbling of the bioreactors in the adjacent lab. I walked to the logistics station where Gary worked. His desk was a mess of shipping labels, fast food wrappers, and a framed photo of Victoria. I looked at the computer terminal. It was a standard company machine, but Gary had requested administrator privileges to manage inventory software updates. I had foolishly granted them. I sat down at his chair. It smelled of his cheap cologne. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket. On it was a piece of software I had written during my hacking phase in college, a kernel-level keylogger. It would record every keystroke, every password, every email draft, and every deleted file, and it would stream that data directly to a hidden partition on my private server. I plugged the drive in. The installation took 30 seconds. I hid the program deep in the system registry, disguised as a printer driver. Then, I opened his email client. Gary was not a smart criminal. He had deleted the items from his sent folder, but he had not purged the deleted items bin. I clicked on the trash icon, and there it was. The anatomy of a betrayal. There were dozens of emails between Gary and an email address, Julian, Vance@synthacorp.com. I opened the first one, dated 3 weeks ago. Julian, the daughter is clueless. She thinks we are just reconnecting. I have access to the shipping logs. I can get you the client list by Friday. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, a physical ache. The daughter, not Athena, not my stepdaughter, just the daughter, an object, an obstacle. I scrolled down. Julian, the formula is encrypted. We cannot download it. We are going to Plan B. We are working on getting her to sign a power of attorney. Once we have that, we can legally transfer the IP rights to your shell company. How fast can you wire the funds? And the reply from Julian. Gary, $5 million will be wired to the Cayman account within 2 hours of the signature. Make sure the POA is broad enough to cover intellectual property. If she suspects anything, the deal is off. $5 million. I stared at the number on the screen. $5 million. That was the price tag they had put on me. That was the value of my blood, sweat, and tears. My mother had sold me out for the price of a mid-sized villa in Cabo. I clicked on the most recent attachment in the trash folder. It was a PDF titled Asset Purchase Agreement. Draft. I opened it. It was a contract between Verdant Skin, represented by Gary Blackwood, attorney-in-fact, and a company called Vanguard Holdings, a shell for SynthaCorp. The terms were simple. Verdant Skin would transfer all patents, trade secrets, and biological samples to Vanguard for a cash payment. The contract was dated for tomorrow, Monday. They were going to execute the sale the moment the banks opened. They were going to use the power of attorney I had signed yesterday, the one buried in the tax papers, to dismantle my life. I sat back in the chair. The warehouse seemed to spin slightly. For a moment, I was a little girl again. I was 7 years old, waiting on the curb for my mother to pick me up from school. It was raining. All the other kids had gone home. I waited for 3 hours. When she finally arrived, she didn't apologize. She was angry that I was wet, angry that I had ruined her leather seats. Why are you always such a burden? Athena? That little girl wanted to cry. She wanted to ask why she wasn't enough, why her success wasn't enough to make them love her, why they looked at her and saw only an ATM. But the woman sitting in the chair, the CEO who had built a $50 million company from a cooler in a Honda Civic, stood up and strangled that little girl. There was no room for tears. Tears were liquid inefficiency. I took out my phone. I dialed a number I had saved for a worst-case scenario. Marcus, I said when he answered. It was Sunday, but Marcus was the kind of lawyer who slept with his phone taped to his hand. Athena? His voice was gravelly. It is Sunday. Are you in jail? No, I said, but I need you to put someone else in jail. 2 people. Actually, talk to me. I have evidence of corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft involving my mother and stepfather. I said. My voice was monotone, stripping away the emotion to present only the facts. They have induced me to sign a power of attorney under false pretenses while I was under the influence of sedatives. They intend to use this document tomorrow morning to sell my IP to Synthocorp for $5 million. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus was one of the best intellectual property and criminal defense attorneys in the country. He had seen everything, but even he was quiet. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "That is heavy. What do you want to do? We can file an emergency injunction. We can freeze the POA. We can call the police right now." "No," I said. "If we stop them now, they will claim it was a misunderstanding. They will say the POA was for taxes. They will say the emails were just exploratory. They will get away with a slap on the wrist. And they will spend the rest of their lives suing me for support." I looked at the camera lens I had just hidden on the shelf behind Gary's monitor. "I do not want to stop them," I said. "I want to let them do it." "Athena," Marcus warned, "that is dangerous. If they sign that contract." "I want them to walk into the trap," I interrupted. "I want them to believe they have won. I want them to stand on a stage and declare victory, and then, when the ink is wet and the wire transfer is pending, I want the FBI to walk in." "You want a sting operation," Marcus said. "I want a slaughter," I corrected. "Legally speaking?" "I can call a contact at the Bureau," Marcus said slowly. "If you have proof of the Synthocorp connection, that is federal trade secret theft. That is 20 years in prison, but we need undeniable proof of intent. We need to catch them in the act of using the stolen authority." "I have a keylogger on Gary's machine," I said. "I have the forged catering invoice, I have the emails, and tomorrow, I will give them the stage." "What stage?" "The launch gala," I said. "The Ritz-Carlton. Tomorrow night. It is the perfect venue. They think they are going to Mexico on Tuesday. I will let them have their champagne on Monday." "You are cold, Athena," Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I like it." "Draft the papers," I said. "Not the injunctions, the criminal complaints, and get the agents ready." I hung up. I pulled the USB drive from Gary's computer. I wiped the keyboard with a tissue to remove my own fingerprints. I left everything exactly as I had found it. I walked out of the warehouse and into the bright, blinding sunlight. I felt lighter. The burden of hoping for their love was gone. It had been replaced by the absolute certainty of their destruction. I drove back to my apartment. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes, the sharpness of my jawline. I remembered the fairy tales my mother used to read to me when I was very small, before she got bored of parenting. She always liked the stories about princesses who were saved by princes. She hated the stories where the witch died. She said they were too mean. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. "If they want to play the villain," I whispered to my reflection, my eyes hard as diamonds, "I will write them a tragic ending." I went to my closet and pulled out a dress. It was not a soft, floral thing. It was red, blood red, the color of warning, the color of war. I was ready for the party. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum, raining a steady, miserable drizzle that Seattle residents know simply as weather, inside my penthouse. However, I was staging a different kind of climate. I was creating a storm of feigned incompetence. If Victoria wanted a broken daughter, I would give her a shattered one. I walked into the kitchen at 8 in the morning. I had washed my face but applied no moisturizer, letting my skin look dry and tired. I wore a pair of old sweatpants and a stained university hoodie. I slumped my shoulders, rounding my posture to shrink my height by 2 inches. Victoria was already there, drinking my coffee and reading the society pages on her tablet. Gary was pacing the living room, talking in hushed tones into his phone. He hung up abruptly when he saw me. "Good morning. Sunshine," Victoria said, peering at me over her reading glasses. "You look dreadful. Did you not sleep?" "No," I mumbled, pouring myself a glass of water with a shaking hand. "I couldn't. The anxiety is eating me alive. Mom, I feel like my chest is going to explode." Victoria's eyes lit up. It was subtle, a tiny flare of satisfaction. But I saw it. She set down her tablet and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Oh, darling, I told you, this life is too much for you. You are a researcher, not a CEO. You are not built for the sharks." "I think you are right," I said, my voice cracking. "I think I made a mistake. I am drowning. The investors, the deadlines, the pressure, I just want it to stop." I looked up at her, letting tears well in my eyes. "I want out." Gary stopped pacing. He practically sprinted over to the kitchen island. "What do you mean? You want out?" he asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of his voice. "I want to sell," I said. "I want to sell the company. Synthecorp, maybe they were right. Maybe I should just take a buyout and disappear. Go live on a farm somewhere. Grow vegetables." Victoria and Gary exchanged a look that was so loud it should have shattered the windows. It was a look of pure, unadulterated greed. They had spent the weekend plotting how to steal the company from under me, and now I was handing it to them on a silver platter. "Well," Gary said, clearing his throat, "that might be wise, if your health is at risk. You know, with that power of attorney you signed. I could handle the preliminary talks for you, save you the stress." "Would you?" I asked, looking at him with wide, pathetic eyes. "I just cannot deal with the lawyers. I cannot deal with the conflict. If you could just handle the transition, I would be so grateful." "Of course, we will handle it," Victoria cooed, hugging me. "That is what family is for. We will take care of everything. You just rest." "I need to go to the office one last time," I said, pulling away gently. "I need to organize the files. The master formula, if we are going to sell, the buyer will need the full genetic sequence. It is on the secure server. I need to move it to a portable drive so you can hand it over." "Yes," Gary said, his eyes widening. "The master formula. That is very important. You should do that today." "I will," I said. And then I was thinking, tomorrow night, the gala at the Ritz-Carlton. "What about it?" Victoria asked. "We should probably cancel it if you are quitting." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I want to use it. I want to use the gala to announce my resignation, and I want to announce that I'm handing full control of the Blackwood estate and the company transition to you. Mom, publicly, I want to honor you. I want everyone to know that you are the one saving me." Victoria froze. Her vanity was at war with her caution, and her vanity won in a landslide. The idea of standing on a stage, being applauded as the savior, the matriarch, the power behind the throne, it was irresistible to her. "That is a lovely idea, Athena," she said, smoothing her hair. "A tribute? Yes, I think that would be very appropriate. I will prepare the speech," I said. "I will make sure everyone knows that you always believed in me." I left the apartment before I vomited. I drove to the office, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The performance was over. Now, the technical work began. I sat in my office with the blinds drawn. I logged into the secure server. I created a new folder titled Project Golden Fleece. Master Sequence. Inside that folder, I placed a file. It was labeled verdant_skin_genomic_map_final.pdf. To the average user, it looked like a standard heavy PDF document, perhaps 300 pages of complex chemical diagrams and genetic coding, and it was, partially. I filled the first 10 pages with gibberish science that looked impressive but meant absolutely nothing. But the file itself was a weapon. I had embedded a piece of executable code within the PDF wrapper. It was a sophisticated beacon. The moment anyone opened this file on a device connected to the internet, it would silently ping a server at the FBI Cyber Division with the device's geolocation, IP address, and MAC address. Furthermore, I added a watermark script. If the file was copied or emailed, it would attach a hidden log of the sender and the recipient. I moved this poisonous little gift onto a USB drive. I also placed a copy in the shared documents folder on the company network, the one I knew Gary had access to. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "The bait is in the water," I said. "Good," Marcus replied. "I am with Special Agent Miller right now. We are reviewing the power of attorney document you scanned. It is fraud. Athena, clear as day, but the intent to distribute trade secrets is the hammer. Are you sure they are going to take it?" "They are starving dogs." "Marcus," I said, "and I just threw them a steak." "We will have agents at the Ritz-Carlton tomorrow," Marcus said. "Undercover, waitstaff, and guests. We need them to initiate the transfer. We need Gary to physically hand over that drive or email that file to Synthocorp. Once he does that, the crime is consummated. He will do it before the appetizers are served," I predicted. I spent the rest of the afternoon making the arrangements for the gala. I called the event planner. I ordered the champagne, Dom Perignon, vintage 2008. I wanted the best for my mother's going-away party. I also made a call to the Ritz-Carlton security director, a man named O'Malley whom I had worked with on previous events. I told him that we had a credible threat of corporate espionage and that federal agents would be on site. He agreed to give them full access to the security feeds and back exits. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted. The tension was gone, replaced by a manic energy. Suitcases were open in the guest room. Victoria was packing, not her usual meticulous folding, but a hasty shoving motion. She was packing her jewelry. She was packing the small safe she kept in her closet. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Victoria jumped. "Oh, just getting ready for a little vacation. After the gala, Gary and I thought we would take a trip to wine country to celebrate your retirement." "That sounds nice," I said. "You deserve it." I walked into the kitchen where Gary was sitting at his laptop, the company laptop. He was sweating again. He was staring at the screen, his finger hovering over the mouse. I knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at the shared documents folder. He was looking at Project Golden Fleece. "Did you find everything you needed, Gary?" I asked. He slammed the laptop shut. Yes, just wrapping up some inventory emails. Hey, that transition plan, did you put the formula on the server?" "It is there," I said. "Right in the shared folder. I thought it would be easier for you to access it there than carrying a physical drive. You can just send it to the lawyers when the time comes." "Right," Gary said, licking his lips. "Send it to the lawyers. Good thinking." He was going to email it tonight, or first thing tomorrow. He was going to send it to Julian at Synthocorp. And the moment Julian opened it, the FBI would have the final link in the chain. "I am going to bed," I said. "I have a big speech to give tomorrow." "Sleep well, honey," Victoria called out from the bedroom. "Tomorrow is going to be a big day." I went to my room and locked the door. I pulled up the Watchtower app on my phone. At 10:45 at night, the alert came through. File accessed. Verdant_skin_genomic_map_final dot PD. User, Gary Blackwood. Action, copied to external media. He wasn't emailing it. He was too paranoid for that. Or maybe Julian had warned him about digital trails. He was putting it on a drive. He was going to hand deliver it. Then, a second alert. Email draft created. To Julian. Vance Synthocorp. Com. Body. I have the package. Meet me at the Ritz bar at 7 p.m. during the speeches. Bring the confirmation of the wire. I smiled in the darkness. It was perfect. They were doing the exchange at the gala. They were going to sell my soul in the same room where they pretended to celebrate my success. I slept soundly that night. It is amazing how peaceful the world feels when you know exactly where the monsters are. The next day, the day of the gala, was a blur of preparations. I went to the salon. I had my hair done in a sleek, severe chignon. I had my makeup done, sharp-winged eyeliner, red lipstick. I put on a black dress. It was not a party dress. It was a power suit disguised as a gown, with sharp shoulders and a plunging neckline that looked like a weapon. Victoria and Gary left for the hotel early. They said they wanted to ensure everything was perfect for my big night. I knew they were going early to meet with the notary and finalize the power of attorney paperwork with the Synthecorp representative before the party started. I arrived at the Ritz-Carlton at 6:30. The ballroom was filling up. The air smelled of expensive lilies and betrayal. I saw Marcus standing near the bar. He was wearing a tuxedo, blending in perfectly. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. He tapped his ear. He was wired. I saw a waiter moving through the crowd with a tray of champagne. He looked at me, and his eyes were hard. Cop eyes. Agent Miller. And then I saw them. Victoria and Gary were holding court near the stage. Victoria was radiant, wearing the dress she had bought with my stolen money. She was laughing, touching the arm of a senator, acting the part of the proud mother. Gary was nervous. He kept checking his watch. He was patting his jacket pocket every 30 seconds, the pocket where the USB drive was. I took a deep breath. I walked into the room. The crowd turned. The applause started. It was polite at first, then enthusiastic. They saw the young, successful CEO. They did not see the executioner. Victoria rushed over to me. "Athena, you look intense. Are you ready?" "I am ready," I said. "Is everything handled?" "Everything," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Gary just sent the final confirmation. We are all set. You just give the speech. Hand over the torch, and then we are free." "Free," I repeated. "Yes, we will be free." "Go on," she urged, pushing me toward the stage. "Make your mother proud." I walked up the steps. The spotlight hit me. It was blindingly white. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Julian Vance from Synthecorp standing near the back exit, looking smug. He exchanged a glance with Gary. Gary nodded and started moving toward him. The trap was sprung. I tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the hall, silencing the chatter. "Good evening, everyone," I said. "Thank you for coming." I looked down at Victoria. She was beaming up at me, tears of joy in her eyes. She thought she had won $5 million. She thought she had broken me. I smiled back at her. It was the smile of a wolf that has finally cornered the hunter. "Tonight," I said, "is a night of truth." The applause that followed my mother's performance was thunderous. It washed over the stage in waves. A physical force generated by 300 pairs of hands clapping for a lie. Victoria stood there, bathing in it. Her chest heaved with the exertion of her fabricated emotion. Her eyes shimmering with tears that she could summon on command like a sorceress calling down rain. She extended a hand toward me, palm open, inviting me to step into her embrace, to complete the tableau of the prodigal daughter returning to the fold. "Come here, my love," she mouthed, the microphone picking up the whisper and amplifying it so it sounded like a prayer. "Let us start this new chapter together." I looked at her hand. It was manicured. The nails painted a soft shell pink. It was the hand that had signed the forged catering invoice. It was the hand that had crushed sedatives into my tea. It was the hand that had pulled the plug on my confidence, so she could sell my life for scrap parts. I stepped forward, but I did not take her hand. I walked past her, my movements fluid and precise, like a predator closing the final distance to its kill. I stepped up to the podium. The microphone was cold silver under my grip. The room quieted, expecting the resignation speech. They expected the tearful capitulation of a burnt-out CEO handing the reins to her beloved mother. "Thank you, Mother," I said. My voice was not the trembling whisper I had used in the kitchen that morning. It was the voice of the CEO who had stared down French billionaires and negotiated shipping contracts in the middle of a port strike. It was steel wrapped in velvet. "You just said you always believed in me. That is a beautiful sentiment. Truly." I paused. I looked out at the audience. I saw Gary near the back, standing next to a man in a sharp charcoal suit, Julian Vance from Synthecorp. Gary was smiling, tapping his breast pocket. The exchange had been made. The drive was gone. "Belief is a funny thing," I continued, my eyes locking onto Victoria's confused face. "Sometimes we believe what we want to hear, And sometimes, we have to see the truth to believe it. Tonight, I prepared a presentation about the future of verdant skin, but I decided to make a last-minute edit. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I did not point it at the screen behind me. I pointed it at the control booth in the balcony, where my head of IT was waiting for my signal. "Roll the tape," I commanded. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying the elegant green logo of verdant skin, flickered black. A low hum of confusion rippled through the crowd. Victoria took a half-step toward me, her smile faltering. "Athena, what are you doing?" she hissed. "This is not the script." Then, the audio cracked through the high-fidelity speakers of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. It was not music, it was a voice, her voice. "She is so stupid. Gary, it is actually painful." The image on the screen resolved. It was grainy, high-contrast black and white footage from a hidden camera. It showed my kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read 2 days ago. Victoria was standing at the counter, crushing pills with the back of a spoon. Gary was sitting at the table, counting cash. The ballroom went deathly silent. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. On the screen, Gary's voice replied, tinny but distinct. "Are you sure this will knock her out? We need her out cold if I'm going to get her thumb on the phone screen. It is enough to drop a horse." Victoria's voice on the screen laughed. It was a cruel, cackling sound. "Just make sure you get the access codes. Once we sell the IP to Synthocorp, we take the $5 million and we vanish. Mexico, Gary, margaritas on the beach, while Little Miss Scientist wakes up to a bankrupt company and a lawsuit." "What if she fights back?" Gary asked on the screen. "With what money?" Victoria sneered, pouring the powder into a mug of tea. "I have convinced her staff she is crazy. I have convinced her she is crazy. By next week, she will be in a mental ward, and we will be rich. She is weak. Gary, she always has been. She is just a cash cow. And we are finally taking her to the butcher." The video cut to black. The sound of a glass shattering pierced the silence. I turned to look at Victoria. She had dropped her champagne flute. It had smashed on the hardwood stage, sending shards of crystal and expensive wine skittering across the floor. Her face was a mask of absolute horror. All the blood had drained from her skin, leaving her looking like a wax figure that had been left out in the sun. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The audience gasped. It was a collective intake of breath, a sound of 300 people realizing they were witnessing a public execution. I turned back to the microphone. "You called me weak," I said, my voice booming through the hall. "You called me stupid. You told this room that you always believed in me." I stepped away from the podium and walked toward her. She flinched as if I were going to strike her. "You did not believe in me, Victoria," I said, dropping the formal mother. "You believed in the $5 million you thought you could steal from me. You believed that because I loved you, I was blind. But you forgot one thing. I am a scientist. We observe, we record, we analyze." Victoria finally found her voice. It was a high, thin screech. "This is a deepfake. It is AI. She is sick. I told you all. She is mentally unstable. She made this up." She spun around to the audience, her arms flailing. "Do not believe her. She is off her medication. Gary, tell them." She looked toward the back of the room for her accomplice. Gary was not telling anyone anything. Gary was running. He had seen the video. He knew the game was up. He had shoved Julian Vance aside and was sprinting toward the service exit near the kitchen, his tuxedo tails flapping behind him. "I wouldn't do that, Gary," I said calmly into the mic, just as Gary reached the double doors. They swung open, but it was not a waiter coming out with appetizers. It was a wall of muscle. 2 men in dark suits stood there, blocking the exit. Gary skidded to a halt, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. He looked left. He looked right. He was trapped. One of the men stepped forward. He pulled a badge from his jacket. FBI, he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. Gary Blackwood, stay where you are. At the same time, the waiters, who had been circulating with trays, set their drinks down on the nearest tables. They drew their weapons, not guns, but handcuffs. They moved with coordinated precision. I looked at the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. You thought you were attending a launch party. You are actually attending a sting operation. This is now an active federal crime scene. Victoria let out a wail. She lunged at me. Her fingers curled into claws. You ungrateful little witch! You set me up. I gave you life. 2 agents were on the stage before she could touch me. They grabbed her arms, pulling her back. She kicked and screamed, the elegant matriarch dissolving into a feral animal. You have the right to remain silent, one of the agents said. Spinning her around and clicking the cuffs onto her wrists, the sound was distinct. Click, click. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Get off me, Victoria shrieked. Do you know who I am? I am the mother of the CEO. No, I said, standing over her. You are a thief, and you are a fraud, and now, you are a federal prisoner. I looked up to the back of the room. The agents had Gary pinned against the wall. They were patting him down. One of the agents reached into Gary's breast pocket and pulled out a silver USB drive. He held it up in the air, showing it to the room like a trophy. We have the device, the agent called out. And we have the buyer. Another voice said. I looked to the left. Julian Vance, the executive from Synthocorp, was trying to blend into the crowd. He was edging toward the main lobby doors, looking at his phone, probably trying to delete emails. Agent Miller, who I had known as the sommelier for the evening, stepped in front of him. Julian Vance? Miller asked. I am just a guest, Julian stammered, his face pale. I do not know what is going on. I work for Synthocorp. I am just here to observe the competition. You are here to purchase stolen trade secrets, Miller said, and you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit industrial espionage in violation of the Economic Espionage Act. You have no proof, Julian shouted, trying to sound indignant but failing miserably. I haven't bought anything. I walked back to the microphone. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and electric. Actually, Julian, I said, addressing him across the ballroom. You wired $5 million to a Cayman Islands account number ending in 4022 exactly 20 minutes ago. We tracked the transfer, and that USB drive in Gary's pocket, the one you were about to take, it does not contain the formula for verdant skin. I paused, letting the smile finally reach my eyes. It contains 300 pages of gibberish and a military-grade tracking beacon that pinged the FBI cyber division the moment Gary copied it to the drive. You bought a paperweight, Julian, and it is going to cost you 20 years. Julian slumped. The fight went out of him. He let the agents cuff him without a word. The ballroom was in chaos. Live streamers who had been there to cover the fashion launch were now broadcasting the arrest of the year to millions of viewers. Flashes were popping. People were shouting, but on stage, in the eye of the hurricane, it was quiet. I looked at Victoria. The agents were marching her down the stairs. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. She looked back at me. Her eyes were not filled with remorse. They were filled with pure, distilled hatred. I hate you, she mouthed. I should have aborted you. It should have hurt, a mother telling her child she wished she had never been born. It should have been a dagger to the heart, but as I stood there, watching the woman who had tormented me for 32 years being dragged away in handcuffs, I realized something profound. The dagger could not hurt me because the target was gone. The daughter who craved her love was dead. She had died in the cold car in Seattle. She had died in the warehouse. She had died when she signed the power of attorney. Goodbye, Victoria, I said, loud enough for the microphone to catch it, but soft enough that it sounded like a benediction. I signaled the AV booth. Cut the feed. The screen went black. The lights in the ballroom came up to full brightness, harsh and unforgiving. "The bar is open," I announced to the stunned crowd. "And the champagne is free. Drink up. We have a lot to celebrate." I placed the microphone on the podium. My hands were steady. I walked down the stairs, past the shattered glass of my mother's flute. I did not look down. I did not look back. The police were leading Gary out the side door. He was weeping, begging the agents to tell him if he could make a deal. He looked at me as he passed. "Athena," he cried out. "Athena, please. I am your father. I raised you." I stopped. I looked at him. "My father is dead," I said. "And you? You are just a bad investment." I turned and walked toward the exit. My heels clicking on the marble floor, the crowd parted for me, not out of polite respect this time, but out of fear and awe. They saw the blood on the floor, metaphorical though it was. They knew what I had done. I had not just survived a hostile takeover, I had nuked the enemy. As I reached the lobby, Marcus was waiting for me. He handed me a file folder. "The restraining orders are filed," he said. "The assets are frozen, and the press release is ready to go out. Verdant skin aids, FBI, and massive corruption bust. You are going to be a hero by morning." "I do not want to be a hero, Marcus," I said, taking the file. "I just want to be left alone." "You will be," he said, "for a long time." I walked out into the cool New York night. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that finally, for the first time in my life, felt completely, undeniably mine. The sirens were fading in the distance. Carrying my past away to a holding cell, I hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Forward," I said. "Just drive forward." The aftermath of a hurricane is always quieter than the storm itself. When the police sirens faded and the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was finally cleared of the last shocked guest and federal agent, I expected to feel a sudden, euphoric rush of victory. I expected to feel like the hero in a movie who walks away from the explosion in slow motion. But reality does not work like cinema. There was no instant gratification. Only the long, grinding machinery of the United States justice system. The legal proceedings dragged on for 6 grueling months. It was a half year of depositions, evidence reviews, and endless meetings with prosecutors who wanted to ensure the charges stuck. The evidence I had gathered, the keylogger data, the video footage from my kitchen, the forged power of attorney, and the tracked USB drive, was irrefutable. But that did not stop Victoria and Gary from trying to wiggle out of the trap. They turned on each other with the ferocity of starving rats. In the interrogation rooms, Victoria claimed she was a battered wife, coerced into the scheme by a domineering husband. She painted Gary as a mastermind of manipulation. Gary, in turn, sang like a canary to anyone who would listen. He gave the FBI dates, times, and recordings of Victoria planning the theft. He admitted that the entire illness was a fabrication. He admitted that the hospital bills were for gambling debts. He handed the prosecutors Victoria's head on a platter in hopes of shaving a year off his sentence. It did not work. The federal judge, a stern woman who had clearly seen enough family dramas to last a lifetime, was unimpressed by their theatrics. On a rainy Tuesday in April, the gavel came down. Victoria Blackwood and Gary Blackwood were both found guilty of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, industrial espionage, and aggravated identity theft. The judge sentenced them each to 10 years in federal prison. There was no parole in the federal system. They would serve 85% of their time. They would be old people, forgotten and gray. By the time they saw the outside world again, I did not go to the sentencing. I read about it in the newspaper while sitting in my office. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, like a heavy coat had finally been taken off my shoulders after 30 years. 2 weeks after they were transferred to their respective facilities, I made a decision. I needed to see her one last time, not to gloat, not to scream, but to close the book. The drive to the Federal Correctional Institution was long and bleak. The facility was a sprawl of gray concrete and razor wire, sitting in the middle of nowhere. I went through the security checkpoints, the metal detectors, and the heavy steel doors. I sat in a small room with a plexiglass divider, waiting. When the guard brought Victoria in, I almost did not recognize her. Without her blow-dried hair, her designer makeup, and her tailored suits, she looked small. She looked frail. The prison uniform was an unflattering beige that washed out her complexion. She sat down on the metal stool, her eyes darting around the room before locking onto mine. For a second, I saw a flicker of the old Victoria, the arrogance, the entitlement. "Athena," she said, her voice scratching through the speaker grill. "You came. I knew you would come. You are a good daughter." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. "Hello, Victoria." "Look at this place," she whispered, leaning closer to the glass. "It is a nightmare. The food is inedible. The women here are animals. You have to get me out. Athena, you have the money. You can hire better lawyers. You can appeal. Tell them it was all Gary. Tell them I was just a victim." I watched her, even now, sitting in a cage of her own making. She was trying to manipulate me. She was trying to pull the strings of a puppet that had long since cut its cords. "I am not going to do that," I said calmly. "What?" She recoiled as if I had slapped her. "But I am your mother. How can you leave me in here? Gary tricked me. He drugged me too. I did not know what I was signing." "Stop," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. "I saw the video. Victoria, I heard you call me stupid. I heard you planning to spend my money on margaritas while I rotted in a mental ward. There is no Gary to blame for the things you said." She stared at me, her mouth working silently. The victim mask slipped, revealing the ugly, bitter rage underneath. "I gave you everything," she hissed. "I gave you life. You were nothing before me. You were a mousy little nerd playing with dirt. You owe me." "I owed you respect," I corrected her. "And I gave you that. I owed you loyalty. And I gave you that until you tried to sell me." I reached into my bag. The guard took a step forward, but I showed him it was just a piece of paper. I slid it through the document slot at the bottom of the divider. It was the quarterly financial report for my company. "What is this?" Victoria asked, looking down at the paper with disdain. "Look at the bottom line," I said. She glanced at it. Her eyes widened. "We doubled our revenue in the last 6 months," I said. "Since the arrest, since the scandal, our sales have skyrocketed. The public respects a survivor. The investors love a fighter. The company is worth $100 million today." Victoria looked up at me, greed warring with hatred in her eyes. $100 million. It was a number she could not comprehend. "I did this," I said, leaning in close to the glass. "I built this, and for a long time, I thought I needed your approval to make it real. I thought if I made enough money, you would finally love me. But I realized something." I paused, letting the words form fully in the space between us. "I did not succeed because of you. Mother, I succeeded in spite of you. You were not the wind beneath my wings. You were the anchor around my ankles. And now that the chain is cut, I am flying." Victoria's face twisted. She opened her mouth to scream, to curse, to spew venom. I stood up. "Goodbye, Victoria." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard her pounding on the glass. I heard her screaming my name. I heard her begging for money. I heard her cursing the day I was born. I walked through the steel doors and did not look back. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound in the world. The next few months were a time of purification. I went through the company with a fine-toothed comb. I fired everyone Gary had hired. I fired the logistics manager who had gone out for beers with him. I fired the receptionist who had let Victoria into the building without an appointment. It was ruthless, perhaps, but necessary. I could not build a future on a foundation that had been compromised. I renamed the company. Verdant Skin was the name of the project, but the company needed to be something more. I renamed it Aegis Materials. In mythology, The aegis is a shield. It represents protection, strength, resilience. I moved our headquarters out of that building. We took a floor in a new skyscraper in downtown New York, overlooking the harbor. I wanted a view that looked out at the ocean, at the horizon where the sky meets the water. Vast and limitless. But success is hollow if it is not shared. I remembered the days in the Honda Civic. I remembered the cold nights and the hunger. I remembered the feeling of having nowhere to turn because the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones hunting you. I took $5 million, the exact amount my mother had tried to sell me for, and I started a foundation. I called it the Civic Trust. It was a grant program specifically for entrepreneurs who were escaping toxic family situations or domestic abuse. We provided seed money, legal counsel, and housing. We gave them the safety net that I had to build for myself. It was 6 months later, almost a year to the day since the arrest. I was sitting in my new office. The furniture was sleek and modern, white leather and chrome. The sun was setting over the city, painting the skyline in shades of gold and violet. I was reviewing the applications for the first round of grants. There was a girl in Chicago developing a new water filtration system while living in a shelter. There was a boy in Texas coding a new educational app from his car. I approved them both. My personal phone buzzed on the desk. It was a rare occurrence. Only a few people had this number. Marcus, my new assistant, and a few close friends I had made in the industry. I looked at the screen. The caller ID displayed a name I had not seen in years. Aunt Sarah. Sarah, the cousin who had spotted me in the grocery store. The leak. The one who had told Victoria I was rich and ignited the entire nightmare. I stared at the phone. It rang and rang. I could picture her on the other end. She had probably heard about the rebranding. She had probably seen the article in the Wall Street Journal about the company's valuation. She was calling to reconcile. She would say that she was shocked by what Victoria did. She would say that the family should stick together. She would ask for a job, or a loan, or an invitation to the next gala. The old Athena might have answered. The old Athena might have felt a twinge of guilt, a need to explain herself, a desire to keep the peace. But the woman sitting in the CEO chair was not the old Athena. I picked up the phone. I did not slide the answer button. I tapped the small I icon in the corner. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact card. My finger hovered over the red text, "Block this caller." I pressed it. The ringing stopped instantly. Silence filled the room. It was not empty silence. It was the rich, full silence of peace. It was the sound of a life that belonged entirely to me. I put the phone down and turned back to my computer. The girl in Chicago needed her funding. I had work to do. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the city lights flickered on, a million little stars shining in the darkness. I was one of them, and I was never going to burn out again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long journey from that cold car in Seattle to this office in New York, but I hope it reminds you that no matter who bets against you, you should always bet on yourself. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please subscribe to the channel Blue Payback, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who might need a little inspiration today. Stay strong, and remember, the best revenge is living well.